All right, so I said I wouldn't do another vlog the rest of the year, and I'm not categorizing this as a vlog. I'm categorizing it as a Halloween special. So, boo. No, I need the light on. Anyways, I think most people who would talk about me on Halloween would probably get into like some sort of correlation or analogy between how scary Halloween is and how scary ME is. It's the scariest of diseases. It's literally called The Living Death, which sounds like a horror film. It is a horror film. Your life is a horror film. Um, but what's frightening people right now is this: is budget cuts. And so for this Halloween special, it'll be why we shouldn't be afraid of budget cuts. Now, I'm going to be very brief about this because I'm not feeling that well, but also uh, it would take me probably 3 hours to actually explain this. And I want to do this in 10 minutes or less. Basically, it's this: neoliberalism and people's association with it, with austerity, is only known at the level of this austerity being applied to the consumption of the working class or the social producers, etc. Right, it's citizenry, right, and the UK is experiencing some of this right now by the Labour Party of all people, but they have to. Okay, um, uh, eating into the consumption of the working class is just a way to boost profits. It doesn't boost growth, by the way. There's been zero growth in the European Union for 20 years. Okay, this is because the United States is the hegemon. Right? We get to extract all the surplus value from all the other capitals. It's a neat trick. And the United States, Donald Trump is talking about, along with Elon Musk, about making $2 trillion in cuts to the federal budget, which is about 33%. They haven't said where he's going to make those cuts. He's promised not to touch entitlements. But the point is, he's actually wants to make cuts to, it seems, the state itself. And those are two different kinds of austerity. Okay, restricting the consumption of the working class versus restricting the consumption of the state. Those are two different forms of austerity. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is more of a claim. I think that the state, its expenditures, its fiscal policies, its inflationary policies, is how they're preventing communism from materializing. So Marx makes an argument that capitalism, which is a private mode of production, right, starts out this way, right? As people working privately in different factories, et cetera, and so forth. It gradually becomes this socialized mode of production. And this socialized mode of production it becomes an undercurrent, right? Uh, Organizing capital and organizing uh, the market. So much so that it becomes a global marketplace, right? And this becomes the conditions, along with the non necessity of the very substrate for what we think produces value, surplus value, which is labor, labor time, more specifically. This all gets um, emptied of its content and uh, becomes, for lack of a better word, um, disposable, but at the same time integral to capital self expansion. Right. So there's this potential for free time. There's this potential for time away from production. There's this potential to not have to produce profit before you eat or have your basic necessities met. Right. But the state is artificially keeping the production and reproduction of the total capital in society um, from falling into ruin. And at the same time, by doing this, right, by keeping inflation just ahead of wages, it keeps scarcity as a feature of this society. So everyone thinks that by making these cuts, it's barbaric. No, what's barbaric is that the state has been operating um, under these policy decisions for no less than 90 years. More so in the last 50 years since deficits have exploded. Okay. Now, this seems like the conservative argument, seems like the libertarian argument, seems like the anarcho-capitalist argument, but it's really the communist argument, because in all their arguments, when we get rid of the spending, prices don't go to zero, profits don't go to zero, wages don't go to zero, society doesn't transform. The socialized productive forces don't actually materialize as directly social, right? There is no rational planning of society. It's all market mechanisms for them. Blind market mechanisms. Whereas we would have conscious control over society. Now, let me explain why I think this is important. Let me segue, but also make an enormous leap here, okay? Because it's difficult to sort of see this because we're so used to needing money to exist, right? Or just in this case, currency. Valueless script from the government to reproduce ourselves. In a society where this is either going away or has gone away, has died out, meaning we no longer have to work for money, and we no longer have to work 40 hours a week, and we no longer have to rely on the government as a form of charity of some sorts. And in fact, there is no more such thing as quote unquote government or the state. Okay? Because it's just an unproductive aspect of human existence. It's overhead. Okay? It's inefficient. Where we no longer have to do this, we can then start accelerating research. Because, and I will use the example of, because we don't have good examples of this outside of bourgeois social relations, but I will use the example of the vaccines, right? Yes, that was a government coordinated effort, but what did it do? It used not living labor, but mostly dead labor, meaning the accumulation of objectified knowledge in the form of supercomputers, but then also the accumulated knowledge that had over 30 years worth into the mRNA technology. And then the living labor comes into play but it comes into play from all across the world now. Okay, from scientists who are getting together to try to fast track this vaccine. Now, imagine they weren't doing that for the purposes of just getting people back to work. Imagine they were just doing it for the purposes of doing it to solve a problem. And there were no barriers. There was no capital requirements. There were no money requirements. There were no trade or intellectual property rights to have to overcome. Because everything in society is now being shared. It's open source. It's now an open society. It's not a closed society anymore. Open in the sense of like an open system, right? Like thermodynamically speaking, okay? And now imagine scientists were allowed to share that. It's what Marx would call the general intellect. So there is a direct correlation between actually getting rid of lots of government spending so we can cause this controlled crash. So prices will fall to zero, wages will fall to zero, profits will fall to zero. But then we get this new society where there's no longer any scarcity as such. Our basic needs are met, right? Before we have to do anything else. Basic needs are met. And then we have this superabundance of free time to do other things for human development, to, again, to plan society rationally instead of having all this wasteful expenditure on of energy and time on things that don't need to be produced at all, like bitcoins or something, or these other things that don't add to how humans can get to a higher level of social existence and um, and we can reach a different understanding of the sciences as applied to production and as applied to humans. So we wouldn't just be part of a process anymore or the outcome of a process. We would have firmer control of those processes. Right now, we're the outcome of the processes, and we're the outcome of these people that we send to Washington or in Parliament every 2 to 4 years, who are making decisions for us. Okay, and that might have been good for the Enlightenment era, but to get beyond the Enlightenment era, we need to actually zero out budgets. That is how we get to communism. Is that scarier than what we have now? Maybe. For you, not to me. I think this is the scariest part of society. I think this is what's barbaric. I don't think communism is barbaric. I think this is barbaric. The society that we're presently living under. And even if it doesn't end up in communism, it's got to be better than this. It's got to be better than living under constant inflationary pressures and living at the whims of bureaucrats and these people who are basically practicing eugenics at these science institutes and regulatory agencies like the FDA, et cetera, and so forth. Because, like for Canada, for example, they'd rather just see us die. They'd rather offer us medically assisted suicide than biomedical research. So, I don't see it trending in a different direction, right? We're living in a very anti-human world right now. And I think that's more frightening than budget cuts, because I think the budget cuts will lead to communism. And I think that is the solution that will get us to quicker treatments and get us to better living standards. So that's all I had to say. Happy Halloween, and everyone have a good one.